Hey, what's going on, guys? It's your boy, Nerd Mode On, and welcome to episode 3 of Battle Tested, a video series where I take user-submitted loadouts and check and see if they'd be viable on the battlefield. For today's video, we're going to be taking a look at a comment that was submitted by Copy Vortex. Now, hopefully I pronounced your name moderately correct, but of course when it comes down to it, let's see how you retrofitted the loadout and see what we're trying to do on the battlefield. So the primary weapon that we're going to be using is the Scar H SV, which is a DMR, just in case you guys are not familiar with the SV part of the Scar H, but overall it's essentially the Scar H just in a DMR form and also a completely different damage model as well as a rate of fire. Now within the Scar H for the attachments, we're going to be using the FLIR scope, the green laser, the heavy barrel, and the angled foregrip. For our secondary weapon, we're going to be using the FN57 with the delta sight, tri-beam laser, and the heavy barrel. Now, of course, it is worth noting that unfortunately I did not have everything unlocked for the FN57. I don't really use a lot of other pistols besides the Desert Eagle, considering that I find it to be one of the best pistols in the game. But of course, with that said, I did have the green laser sight, and I didn't really use my pistol too often, so I don't think it's going to detract from the video by itself. Now, of course, transferring over to some of our equipment that we're going to be using, we'll be using the motion sensors, which are definitely a very good thing, especially if you're somebody that's moderately aggressive on the battlefield. Alongside that, the PLD, which is definitely a gadget that I don't use very often, which is unfortunate because it's actually really powerful if you actually use it, and it's something that can really enhance your ability to find players and help your team when it comes down to team play. Now, of course, since we are using the FLIR sight, it only seems logical to use smoke grenades to take full effect of our environment and overall the scope for this particular weapon. Now, it is worth noting that I am extremely familiar with how frustrating this can be, especially when you have this type of combination with the FLIR sight as well as the smoke grenades, and I know many players are very against this type of gameplay, and overall it just seems like a lot of players are against the tactic by itself. So with that said, I attempted to try to play the game without using this tactic, but I quickly found that I was at a disadvantage due to the environments and the engagements that I was fighting in, so I figured I would just kind of jump right into the mix and try to do what everybody else is doing and take full advantage of what was going on the battlefield. And finally, the field upgrade that we're going to be using is the Special Operations, which is definitely very fitting for this overall assessment of what we're going to be doing on the battlefield and the gameplay that we're going to be trying to achieve when it comes down to it. Now with that said, let's kind of jump into the statistics of the Scar H SV to kind of give you guys an idea of how this weapon performs on the battlefield, what type of engagements that you'll find yourself to be most effective at, as well as how you overall think the weapon is going to perform when it comes down to the sheer numbers. So the Scar H SV does have a rounds per minute of 260. Now of course this is on the lower spectrum when it comes down to the rate of fire for DMRs in general, but one of the redeeming factors about this is that it does have a velocity of 620 meters a second as well. So of course with that said, that basically means that you don't have to compensate as much for moving or long range targets, so of course it'll be easier to hit those players, especially in those engagements. Now transferring over to the damage model, you guys will notice that the Scar H SV does have a maximum damage of 45 damage up until 15 meters. Now after 15 meters you're going to see a gradual decline of the overall damage being outputted at range, but of course the minimum damage is 38 damage, and that is achieved at 80 meters. Now some other interesting information about the Scar H SV is that it does have a short reload of 1.85 seconds, which is definitely on the faster end when it comes down to it. You'll be able to switch out magazines a lot quicker than some of the other DMRs and even some of the assault rifles in many cases. Alongside that, it also has a long reload of 2.3 seconds, which is definitely pretty quick by itself. It's in comparison to a lot of the assault rifles, which is definitely a very redeeming quality when it comes down to it. And the last piece of information to really talk about is the recoil numbers, considering that this is the most potent information that you'll run into, especially when it comes down to engaging enemies or even suppressing them at medium to long range. So the Scar H SV does have a left pull of 0.05 as well as a right pull of 0.5. However, the vertical recoil is 1 with a first shot multiplier of 1, so you're basically going to be having no recoil when it comes down to it. Every time you pull the trigger, it's more nor less going to be recentering back to the center of your screen. Now, one of the very redeeming qualities about having a weapon like this, considering that the DMRs in general, especially the Scar H SV, are single fire weapons. They unfortunately do not have the capabilities to go full auto or even burst, so of course every time you pull the trigger, by the time the recoil goes up and then recenters back to the screen, it's going to be a lot easier for you to follow up shots, especially at medium and long range. So with all the statistics talked about when it comes down to the Scar H SV, let's take a look at some of the accessories that were designated towards this particular rifle and see if they really fit the gameplay that I was trying to go for and overall what the DMR category is made for. So one of the attachments that I was most surprised by, especially when it comes down to this DMR, is the green laser. This is definitely an attachment that I really wouldn't recommend, especially in the current standard of Battlefield 4. Now the reason I say that is because for a DMR, you're definitely going to be sitting at medium to long range. That's kind of the sweet spot. That's kind of where you want to be, especially when it comes down to it. Now of course the green laser is kind of like a, hey everybody, I'm right here, take a look at me, especially if you're looking at somebody in their general area. And for a class that's primarily about being behind enemy lines, sneaking up on people, taking pot shots at medium and long range, this is definitely an attachment that I really wouldn't recommend if you're wanting to be a defensive player. However, in the off chance that you're wanting to be a far more aggressive player, then of course the green laser sight would make a lot more sense. However, unfortunately, with the shortcomings of what this weapon has to offer when it comes down to close combat, unfortunately I really can't recommend this accessory by itself. One of the main reasons I say that is because most players that are going to be wanting to play up close are going to be using powerhouses like the F2000, the AEK, and even shotguns in many cases, considering that they are far more effective than they used to be. Now of course the angled grip at one time was definitely a very notorious attachment for the DMRs, considering that it granted you the ability to be a lot more stable in combat at medium and long range, and overall your follow-up shots were far more accurate than they normally would be. However, since DICE continues to make alterations to the grips, especially when it comes down to the benefits and the negatives of them, this is definitely an attachment that I can't recommend at the current standard of Battlefield 4. Now the main reason I say that is because a few months ago DICE went in and made some alterations to the grips. Some of them also got some benefits, and in many cases a lot of them were affected by this change significantly. Now the specific change that I'm referring to is that the grips and a few other accessories have been altered in their performance when it comes down to an increase in spread. Now what this really means is that if you're using a DMR in this particular case and you're just pressing the mouse button once every time and you're not really waiting for the weapon to recenter as quick as it possibly can, you are going to be penalized as a due result of this, and this is going to make you less accurate at those medium and long ranges, which is definitely more important than you might guess, considering that Battlefield is about a militaristic large-scale warfare, which overall allows you to really find yourself in engagements that are at medium and long range. So even the smallest little decimal will make a significant difference, especially depending on what range you're engaging your enemy foe at, and that can definitely mean the difference between you killing them or that player getting away and taking cover. But other than that, I found everything else to be really well in this weapon. I found the overall smoke grenades to be exceedingly beneficial on the battlefield, and I quickly found myself using them to try to get from point A to point B without getting shot by enemy players. Now of course I was also using smoke grenades to allow my teammates to move on to objectives, or at least move outside, especially when it comes down to Operation Locker, which is known for having really bad gameplay in some aspects, especially if your team is not willing to make the initiative pushes. So overall, I found this weapon and this loadout by itself to be exceedingly beneficial, especially on the battlefield. I felt like I was providing my team with very good information, especially when it comes down to the motion sensors. Also, the loadout also provided me with smoke grenades to allow my teams to push on to objectives or get out of hairy situations, which was definitely very beneficial when it comes down to it. I tried not to sit in the smoke and become that Wookiee that was kind of surrounded by it, but of course I found myself doing that from time to time. And finally, you can't go wrong with the PLD, especially if you're wanting to be a team player. Of course, you can lock onto helicopters and do a lot of other great things that allow your teams with javelins to use them to destroy vehicles, so of course you are definitely very beneficial in that aspect. But anyway guys, that's really all the information I have for you, especially when it comes down to this particular loadout. However, if you guys would like to recommend a loadout for the future, please use a similar format as this guy did, considering that it worked out very well for the video. But of course, if you're interested in leaving a loadout, just consider leaving it in the comments below, and hopefully I will pick your submission for the next episode. But until the next episode guys, this has been NMO, and I'm going to be signing out guys. Peace.